Violent chaos unfolds across the shoreline. Huge fleshy tendrils slither out of the water, grabbing people who try to flee and drag them into the depths, as giant harpoons made of bone whiz across the beach, cutting down unfortunate sunbathers in droves. It is a terrifying massacre, but you'd never in a million years be able to guess its source. On April 10th, 2010, something strange began to happen in the three Portlands. Now, the anomalous extra-dimensional city-state that overlaps with the locations of Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, and the Isle of Portland is no stranger to unusual occurrences, so it took the population a little while to notice that something was happening. But for some unknown reason, sailboats and motorboats were beginning to vanish from the city. The disappearances occurred overnight, when there was no one around to witness them, but slowly, the citizens began to notice that their friends and family members were going out in their watercrafts and never returning home. By April 15th, the civilians were becoming noticeably concerned, fearing the worst. On April 16th, their worst fears were confirmed when two local ghosts, Ankar Ahmed and Greg Moore, went for a nighttime stroll along the harbor. They heard a sudden commotion and rushed to the scene of the disturbance. They arrived just in time to see a living individual being dragged into the watery depths by a large, vein-like tendril. Ahmed asked Greg to wait on land while he ventured out into the water to look for the victim. Unfortunately, Ahmed never came back, and Greg took his story to the Three Portlands Police Department. After waiting a few days for the local man-eating clam populace to migrate, the FBI Unusual Incidents Unit mounted a formal investigation. On the morning of April 17th, all of the missing vehicles suddenly reappeared. This left the UIU and the people of the city with even more questions. Where had all the boats gone? Why were they suddenly back? And what had happened to the missing people who had not been returned along with them? On April 19th, UIU agents dove into the harbor to search for any unusual activity, and while they didn't spot anything especially strange, they did discover that there were fewer animals in the harbor than usual. On April 21st, the threat that had been preying on the citizens of Three Portlands actually made itself known. At 11:19 a.m., 17 boats moved away from the docks on their own, drifting up onto shore, though no one could be seen captaining any of them. As the boats lined up, they began to form a wall blocking access to the water. No one could get in or out. Civilians watched in shock as the boats began to warp and change before their eyes, growing thick masses of scales on their surfaces, sprouting harpoon guns that fired bony projectiles, and slashing veiny tendrils at anyone within reach. The citizens began to panic, running in every direction in an attempt to escape the monstrous boats. But they were too slow to evade the attacks, and the boats snatched them off of the shore and yanked them aboard, using their harpoons to impale those who managed to run farther than the tendrils could stretch. As the army of fleshy boats closed in around the shore, a tugboat broke through the surface of the water. Unlike the rest of the boats, it had a noticeable hole in its hull and was missing its wheelhouse. At an unnaturally quick pace, the tugboat began to advance onto land, using its tendrils to drag itself along the shore and into the more populous part of town. It grabbed civilians at random, absorbing their blood into its metallic surface as it went. Suddenly, it spotted Albert Izzat, a noted member of the Church of the Broken God, and began to focus its attack on him. But before the tugboat monster could reach Izzat, a city security golem interfered. Sadly, though the golem put up a valiant fight, the anomaly was able to destroy it by falling onto it again and again until the golem was no longer able to get back up. There are few creatures that would survive having a boat drop itself on top of them repeatedly, and sadly the security golem was not one of them. With the golem out of the way, the boat continued to drag itself through the streets wildly, crashing through the side of a local restaurant where its owner, an entity known as the Gruel, was in the middle of a busy brunch service. At the sight of the invading watercraft, the Gruel set down his pitcher of bottomless mimosas, wiped his hands on his apron, and grabbed his trusty dual-wield swords from underneath the counter. He kept them there in case someone attempted to dine and dash, but he figured they would do just fine against a blood-drinking tugboat. While the gruel kept the tugboat busy, UIU forces were able to break through the barricade of boats for a brief period of time, allowing more security golems to enter the area, as well as allowing more citizens to escape. Unfortunately, this little victory was short-lived as further unforeseen horrors drudged themselves up from the deep. The reanimated corpses of various species native to the harbor began to crawl out of the water, surrounding the gruel and allowing the tugboat to escape the fight. As it made its way back to the harbor, every boat it passed attempted to toss bodies onto the tugboat, covering it in fresh blood. Slowly but surely, the damage to the tugboat began to repair itself. Once the boat had regained its strength, it set its sights on a previously untouched cargo ship. An observing UIU officer determined that the boat was somehow attempting to convert the cargo ship to transform it into another one of its fleshy allies. But before the transformation could take place, a cargo crate broke open, spilling over 1,000 hardtack crackers. Suddenly, the tugboat stopped everything that it was doing. It took one tendril and began to count each individual cracker that had spilled out. While the tugboat was distracted with its task, a citizen offered the UIU use of their rare metals cannonball collection in the fight to apprehend the aggressive boat. One particular cannonball, made from electrum, was able to puncture the hull of one of the infected ships, rendering it motionless. They were elated to have found a weapon that worked against these boats. While the tugboat continued to count, the remaining townspeople gathered all of the electrum they could find and began to fight back against the boats. One by one, the boats sank, and all the while the tugboat continued to count. In the meantime, UIU officers managed to free the gruel from his zombie attackers. They presented him with an electrum cannonball, which he proceeded to punch finger holes into and wield like a bowling ball. Then the gruel had a score to settle. No one, whether human, ghost, or tugboat, was going to mess with his brunch. The gruel barreled towards the harbor, grabbed hold of the still distracted tugboat, and punched it hard with his cannonball fist. If the tugboat could breathe, the punch would have knocked the air out of its lungs. The gruel then threw the tugboat out of the water and continued the savage beating before preparing to destroy the battered vehicle once and for all. He lifted it up into the air, jumped up to follow it, and hit it with so much force that the tugboat careened through the air, colliding with a portal that had transported it to the Isle of Portland. Luckily, this portal could only be unlocked via a high-speed impact from a water-based vehicle. Speaking of luck, an SCP Foundation team was returning to the Isle from a failed mission just as the anomalous boat appeared in their reality. The object was knocked unconscious by the impact of its travel and the beating from the gruel, and in its incapacitated state, it was transported to a nearby Foundation site. There it was contained and given the designation of SCP-6426. Due to its anomalous traits, including the consumption of blood, a talent for hypnosis, and a compulsive counting habit, it was also given the nickname the Vampire Boat. SCP-6426 is a Keter Class sapient hostile entity that, in an inactive state, bears the appearance of a harbor tugboat in a constant state of rust and degradation. Any blood or organs containing blood that come into contact with the boat will be absorbed through the metal, causing the degradation to visibly improve as a result. The most effective blood appears to come from humans, cetaceans, and a few specific species of cetaceans. The entity does not only use the absorbed blood to improve its appearance, but is also capable of using it to create organic additions to its body, including the vein-like tendrils spotted in the 3 portlands, cognitohazardous eyes attached to bending eye stalks, harpoon guns, and cannons capable of firing ammunition made from anomalous species of barnacles. These barnacles are capable of reanimating dead tissue on contact, and SCP-6426 frequently uses them to create instances of SCP-6426-C, masses of reanimated tissue that the boat uses to aid in its attacks or self-defense. SCP-6426 uses its tendrils to grab prey and drag them towards itself, but the tendrils serve an additional purpose as well. Each of the tendrils has a mouth on the tip, similar in structure to that of the North American medicinal leech. When the tendril has made contact with its prey, the mouth will then bite into the spinal column of the creature, causing its brain function to cease as its canines grow long and hollow, hard scales form on their skin, and their muscle mass and bone density increase. Once they have been transformed in this way, organisms taken by SCP-6426 are designated SCP-6426-A. These instances are used to the entity's advantage, helping it to extract blood from victims at a distance, as well as providing an additional line of defense and offense. In the event that SCP-6426 encounters another watercraft, it is able to use SCP-6426-A to convert the vehicle into an instance of SCP-6426-B. These converted boats are similar to SCP-6426 and are able to function on their own. However, they are unable to produce their own eye stalks or cannons, unable to create SCP-6426-A instances, and do not appear to be as intelligent as their creator. In the early days of its containment, the exact nature of the anomaly's intelligence was the subject of debate amongst the research staff. However, on one specific occasion, the Foundation was able to establish a line of direct communication with SCP-6426 and conduct the first, and so far the only, interview with the vampiric tugboat. The inciting incident occurred when the arrival of the Foundation's latest hardtack shipment was delayed, leaving the boat with nothing to count and nothing to keep it occupied. Freed from the bounds of counting, it managed to escape and grab hold of several Foundation staff members with its tendrils. After chasing the boat through the site, guards were able to corner it, prompting the boat to absorb the bodies it had taken and use the organic material to produce a siren that emitted the sound of a human voice. It is through this siren that SCP-6426 responded to interview questions, using the voice of one of its victims. Junior researcher Sajad Williamson, in spite of his protests, was selected to conduct the interview. His fellow staff members refused to take no for an answer, and as the newest hire, the unpleasant job fell on his shoulders. Much to everyone's surprise, the anomaly began the conversation rather politely, saying, "I am so sorry. I thought you were those self-righteous lunatics from the church. I apologize profusely for any trouble I may have caused, and I want to point out I fully support your mission. Yes, our first line of defense against the undersea menace. I am more than willing to punch sharks. Salacious, yes, right. How rude of me, yes." Dr. Williamson's first question concerned SCP-6426's apparent intended victim back in 3 Portlands, Albert Izzat. SCP-6426 responded, "Albert? His first name is really Albert." "Well, what other relationship is there to say besides the hunter and the hunted? Admiral Izzat is a ruthless man, known for terrorizing and slaughtering people like me. He was leading a search party of those barbaric notophiles, intending to gut me like a seal." "What do you mean, people like you?" Dr. Williamson inquired. "Free thinkers, of course. People who are unafraid to break from the mold to carve their own path in life instead of following the predetermined route set by that ignorant check valve. The church is built upon a foundation of lies. No one's really a petty officer on this ship. We're all just cabin boys, stumbling around in the dark as we follow the commands of an offhand COB. If you want real power, real freedom, all you have to do is listen for the call of the beast. Open the porthole, and he'll squeeze you right through." Dr. Williamson, feeling rather in over his head, attempted to convince one of his colleagues to take over. When he refused, however, Dr. Williamson continued, "Could you explicate your activities within the harbor and how you arrived there?" "Well, after I got the boatswains off my trail, I found a cave to hide in. I was forced to hide in, yes, forced to hide deep in the cave, which turned out to be a tunnel. Surprisingly, the tunnel led to some coastal community where I took refuge, licking my wounds in the safety of the depths as those zealots stalked the surface. I spent my time preparing, gathering the strength necessary to face them once more, until I was ambushed, assaulted within my hideout by a boatswain. I fought for my life as I was forced out into the open and descended upon by a manner of monsters and freaks, all this orchestrated by that scumbag Izzat. I was beaten within an inch of my life before. I'm not quite sure what happened after that. I believe I was knocked unconscious. You'll have to illuminate me on how I came to be in your custody. At this point, the interview began to veer in an odd direction. The boat expressed confusion about the nature of Williamson's questions, specifically how little they related to the subject of sharks and punching them. It was at this point that the site director sought guidance from the Multi-U department. A researcher there informed Williamson about the confusion. SCP-6426 had mistaken the SCP Foundation for another organization, the Shark Punching Center. Dr. Williamson resumed the interview, prepared to play along and keep the boat comfortable. Unfortunately, Williamson was a terrible liar. Yes, we are the Shark Punching Center. We will determine if you are a suitable candidate to carry out the mission to search, punch, and contain salations. This verbal misstep caused SCP-6426 to become suspicious. After a moment, it pieced together the truth and began to throw itself against the wall in a desperate attempt to escape. It was apprehended by security guards, who impaled it with a naval ram and returned the watercraft to its containment cell. The exact reason for its apparent fear and hatred of the Foundation is currently unknown, and the boat has made no attempt to speak since. Currently, SCP-6426 is kept in a 39-meter by 39-meter by 50-meter containment chamber. Beneath the chamber, there is an artificial lava tube. The tugboat has a naval ram through its hull and engine, holding it in place. This ram is checked daily for signs of degradation, as it is the primary force keeping the anomaly immobile. If the ram is ever removed or damaged somehow, a failsafe system will activate, releasing 100 hardtack crackers and 2 pieces of electrum into the containment chamber. This is intended to keep the tugboat occupied until the naval rod can be replaced. If for some reason the naval rod fails and the boat runs out of hardtack to count, well, there will be nowhere on water or land that we can hide. Now go check out SCP-1861, the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer, and SCP-4217, Contain the Bismarck, for more.